Hi everyone, I'm number one Marmaduke fan. If you enjoy this children's book review, please consider liking it, subscribing to this channel, and clicking the bell to receive notifications of new videos. Your thoughts and comments are also appreciated, and I think this is a book that is particularly worth discussing with others. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the themes in the opening chapters of one of the best works of children's literature I've read in my life. In fact, the Blackstar of Kingston and the Green Ember series is one of the most impactful works of fiction I've read for any age group. If you like Brian Jake's popular Redwall series, I'm sure you'd see similarities instantly. Both series focus on animal characters in a medieval-esque setting. In contrast to Redwall, however, I think S.D. Smith's books in this series touch on a set of themes I think are interesting to compare with the high fantasy or historical fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings and George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. I say this because both of these series are about worlds with rich histories. Unlike Martin, whose work is sometimes shockingly violent, and unlike Tolkien, who was an English professor and sometimes wrote with advanced, dense language, Smith writes his stories with younger readers in mind, but I think he uses simple stories and ideas to communicate a similarly rich and lived-in world that adults can fully appreciate. My perception of these books is that they have been selling quite well, but given their quality, I'm surprised that they are not a bigger thing in the culture yet, like Harry Potter was for children growing up in the 1990s. Maybe Harry Potter was such a unique cultural lightning bolt, you could never expect something to catch on quite that well. But I've loved each of Smith's books about rabbits with swords so much, I don't just want to talk about them, I want many more readers to go check them out. Incidentally, #RabbitsWithSwords is the official hashtag suggested by the publisher for discussing these books online, and I think it's a fun hashtag. I was quite absorbed by Smith's writing on my first reading, and as I've reread them with a more critical eye, they've continued to impress me. These are the kinds of characters I'd love to debate with people about. Their world is full of unexplored mysteries that I think would be fun to theorize about. When I read Smith's work, I don't just see good standalone stories. I see an imaginative and well-read author slowly building a world and a series of stories which directly tackle universal and powerful themes. I don't know if the world of Natalia is going to become a cultural touchstone like Hogwarts or Narnia or Hobbiton, but the quality of the first stories in this series is so promising. I feel like I'm watching something truly great unfolding, the product of an artist with vision and talent. In addition to strongly encouraging you to read The Blackstar of Kingston and The Green Ember for yourself, I want to talk about the themes of these books on this channel, in part because they had such impact on me. I do not want these videos to be replacements to reading the books yourself. Because of that, these are not going to be thorough plot summaries. Instead, for this video, I just want to talk about the first 3 chapters of The Blackstar of Kingston, a novella-length prequel to the Green Ember series. You should know that the author personally recommends that you read the Green Ember series before you read the prequel, and The Blackstar of Kingston does contain a couple of what I'd consider minor spoilers for the Green Ember. However, I happened to read The Blackstar of Kingston first, and as this was my introduction to the Rabbits with Swords books, I'd like to talk about it first. I have 2 reasons why I only want to talk about the first 3 chapters of The Blackstar of Kingston. First, if I can sell you on why I love it so much, I hope covering only the first bit will be enough to whet your appetite and strongly encourage you to freaking buy this book and read it for yourself. Second, Smith is good at pacing a shorter book and introduces all of the key themes, which are built upon later in the early chapters. I'm not overlooking the final chapters because I think they're unimportant. I actually think they close the story spectacularly and they deliver on all the promises of the early chapters. I'm only focusing on the first chapters because I think it's an effective way about talking about the themes of this book without spoiling all the details of why you should go and buy this and read it yesterday. I've often joked on this channel that I love spoilers, and I actually sometimes look for spoilers for certain series, but I'm going to give this a firm spoiler warning. I'd prefer if you go read this book for yourself first and then came back to this discussion. This book touches on all the key ingredients I find myself missing when I read bad comics or watch bad blockbuster movies. I can't stress enough that, in my opinion, you're going to want to experience Smith's world with fresh eyes. With that, consider yourself firmly warned. And now, summa spoilerum, let's talk about what happens in this book and why it kicks so much rear end. In order to talk about the themes of these books, I need to talk about the plot and characters enough so that you can see how the author is threading these ideas throughout the book. Chapter 1 introduces us to the displaced rabbits of Natalia, King Whitsun Mariner, and his wife, Queen Lily. We immediately get the impression that Whitsun is a good king, burdened by the responsibility of leading his people, and that Queen Lily is both supportive of her husband and a sensible source of good counsel. It is clear that life for the rabbits is a deadly struggle for survival. While briefly telling the history of how the rabbits came to flee their home and found the town of Settleton, Smith uses simple metaphors like replanting an uprooted flower to introduce children to ideas like helplessness, the struggle for survival, and hope. This is good narratively because the protagonist's story is rooted in these themes, and Smith uses his first chapter to introduce a young audience to what may be a new concept, an unfriendly world where focus and perseverance is required to just survive. Walters, a representative of King Whitsun, brings news of Lord Grimble advocating to clear more trees to help survive the winter, in defiance of Whitsun's express orders. Politics is never front and center in these children's books, but from the few details we get, it's clear that Whitsun's power is not absolute, but shared with a council of nobles. I would have appreciated getting to know more details on how the government works, but for a children's book focused on characters, this was an effective way to introduce political themes, which might have been boring or hard to understand for children. The rabbits of Settleton have a resource problem. Should they be using resources liberally to survive, or should they conserve resources for the future? It is important even for kids to understand this because, as we'll soon see, the rabbit's resource problem is critical for Fleck Blackstar's character and the crux of the story's plot. Whitsun perceives Lord Grimble as a thorn in his side and a potential political problem that Prince Lander may have to deal with as the future king. But Whitsun doesn't see Grimble as treasonous. I wish we got to see more of Lord Grimble and understand his character, and I have a feeling we will see more of him in future books, but he's just not the focus of this book. Here, Grimble isn't so much a character as just a problem in the background to help set up the main character's stories. In this case, Lord Grimble's political opposition convinces King Whitsun and Queen Lily that they have to take serious steps to prepare their son, Prince Lander, who we see is an energetic, well-meaning, but still immature young man, for the burden of kingship. In the world of Natalia, to be a good king is to shoulder tremendous responsibility on behalf of others. These themes are key to the character relationships, which I think give this book power and resonance. Here are the 3 character relationships which I think are most important. First, King Whitsun and his relationship to his son, Prince Lander. Second, Fleck Blackstar's relationship to his king, and by extension, his country. Third, Fleck Blackstar's relationship to Prince Lander, who represents the hope and future for a troubled people. These are clearly not the only character relationships which are important to this book and to his character, but I think they are the key relationships to understanding the kinds of virtues and principles Smith is conveying to young people through a fictional story. Natalia is not a happy, fun, Saturday morning cartoon world with cute animal characters and problems which are easily resolved. It is a harsh world which requires firm resolve in the face of tremendous evil. This brings us to Fleck Blackstar. Like King Whitsun's adopted father, King Whit, Fleck Blackstar's father, John, died at the Golden Coast, which as far as I can surmise was a major military defeat where many of the grown men died to give Whitsun and Fleck's generation time to escape. Blackstar is not a surname, but an informal nickname. In this culture, a Blackstar is worn by a master miner, like Fleck's late father. Fleck trained with his father in the mines, but did not earn his own Black Star or the status of Master Miner. Because he wears his father's jacket, which includes the Black Star patch as a memento, he is misidentified by the king as a Black Star, and this becomes a nickname for him throughout the book. I should note that I love this character. The first time I read this book, I was struck by his intensity and his vision. I've mentioned before on this channel about how I love pure, simple characters like Samurai Jack, who exhibit righteousness as a primary character trait. And because I see those qualities in Fleck, it might be hard for me to put aside my real emotional connection with the character and examine him objectively. For example, what are his character flaws? What makes him interesting or unique? Is he a Mary Sue, meaning a character without noticeable flaws? What I will say about Fleck Blackstar is that he is not the most complex character in terms of understanding his values and his motivations, but the reason I think he is so intensely interesting is that he's a particular type of good guy that I've rarely seen. He sees a problem in life. He has a vision for how he could both improve himself and the world he lives in, and he pursues that goal with intelligence and commitment. Past, present, and future are important to who Fleck is. The death of Fleck's father has given him a sense of urgency. Sure, the rabbits have peace now, but the memories of war and death reminds Fleck that there are enemies in this world for rabbits. He sees the problem that the rabbits have with finding enough resources to survive the winter, and he envisions himself not as a gardener, but as a coal miner who can actively help fix this problem. He clearly has love for king and country, and leaving behind a better world for the next generation is something Fleck starts with at the beginning of his story. Fleck's story isn't the story of an immature young man coming of age and becoming a hero. It is the story of a young man who is wise beyond his years, who sees a problem and commits himself to doing something constructive with his life. These are abstract themes and ideas which are conveyed through a charming conversation Fleck has with King Whitson, Queen Lily, and Prince Lander, who happen upon him while he is gardening. Their conversation reinforces some of the themes I've already discussed. King Whitson is a good king who appreciates his subjects and values their work. We can pick up that Fleck has great admiration for King Whitson, both by his respectful way of speaking to them and when he accepts Blackstar as his nickname when the king sees his coat and mistakes him for a Blackstar miner. Both Queen Lily and Fleck talk about the ominous nature of the mountains they can see just across the lake. Something I've noticed both in this book and the Green Ember series is a powerful sense of dread. In a world where rabbits fear attack from larger predators, the mountains seem dangerous and unknown. What I love about this chapter is, in a succinct way, we're seeing a concrete example of what fear of the unknown might look like. Fleck gardens, and every day he sees forbidding mountains which may contain dangerous predators, but Fleck also sees potential in those mountains, both as a source of coal and as a foothold for the rabbits to expand their territory and prepare for war. Fleck's best friend is Galt, who is also an apprentice miner before the tragedy of the Golden Coast, and through their conversation we immediately get a feel for what makes them different. Galt is content. He likes the peaceful life the rabbits have found and asks if Fleck has survivor's guilt. Fleck answers this question directly with a yes. He can't accept a quiet, safe life in light of the death he has experienced. We owe them vigilance, he says to Galt. The older generation's sacrifice has made Fleck conscientious. In my opinion, there's something very primal and beautiful about Fleck seeing foreboding mountains every day while gardening, being afraid of the terrors they may contain, but seeing a need to explore and settle there for the sake of others. He is afraid to go there and believes that is precisely why he needs to go there. In addition to showing the contrast between Galt and Fleck's personalities and perspectives, their conversation also introduces ideas of class. As manual laborers, they speak about the same problems the king and queen do, but in layman's language. Galt sees the king and queen as so high above their station, he and Fleck needn't concern themselves with the affairs of royalty and lords. In contrast, Fleck sees King Whitson as more down-to-earth, someone who would be interested in the affairs of the lower class, and he tells Galt that he plans to request an audience with the king. The closing words of Chapter 2 reinforce the themes of the chapter. Fleck asks his friend with seriousness, "What's in those mountains, Galt?" Because Smith is writing a short novella, he's using his words and pages economically. In one brief chapter, we've gotten a sense of Fleck's intense drive, and his closing words remind us of the importance of these mountains for the rest of the book. Fleck believes he must explore the terrors of the unknown. In Chapter 3, Fleck gets an audience with the king and must briefly communicate to Whitson his concerns and make his proposal. When Fleck explains his proposal to explore and mine the mountains and establish a buffer against enemies, King Whitson asks if he is a military man. Fleck admits that he is not, but expresses his opinion that perhaps all rabbits ought to be. I think this underscores something key about Fleck's character. Though he has not been raised to pursue the military as his career, Fleck is so concerned for the rabbit situation that his proposal to mine uncharted territory effectively means that he and the other miners will have to physically train to function as soldiers if need be. This is the self-sacrificial part of Fleck's proposal. This isn't a fun adventure. This is something potentially life-threatening and time-consuming. In their conversation, King Whitson comes off as jovial, straightforward, and perceptive. Though he is a commoner, Fleck perceptively observes the king's drawings of ships and suggests they could mount the expedition across the lake by sailing. Impressed, King Whitson offers Fleck the position of captain and charges him to organize a company of 10 miners, much to Fleck's surprise. The members of the Blackstar Company flesh out the cast of characters. Not all of them have their own character arcs, but each contributes to the story in their own way as secondary characters. Galt is Fleck's lieutenant, and Burnley, a massive veteran miner, is his second. The details of their training and preparations are touched on briefly. Galt also hints at the political implications by joking about complaints that the king chose someone who was almost a miner to lead what seems like a mad expedition to many. Once again, Smith uses their closing conversation to reinforce the theme of the chapter. Essentially, these rabbits have to boldly go where no rabbit has gone before because they have few choices to survive. Smith also hints at the history of this world by having the characters allude to the story of the Leapers for inspiration. Just like J.R.R. Tolkien's world of Middle-earth and George R.R. Martin's world of Westeros, Smith's fantasy world has a history and an oral tradition that is only being hinted at so far, but clearly provides fertile ground for more stories in the future. Though the details on the Leapers isn't clear yet, they are spoken of in a way which is somewhat similar to how people might refer to Adam and Eve or the fall of man. Whatever the Leapers story is, it's clearly critical to the world of these rabbits, and I like how it's alluded to in casual conversation without all the details. It gives Smith's world a lived-in feel. That concludes Chapter 3. I've deliberately left out a lot of the best stuff. It's stuff that moved me to tears, not just during my first reading, but my subsequent readings as well. And I'm not one to turn on the aqueducts that easily while reading. What I will tell you is that in each successive chapter, the themes of duty, danger, and dread are built up. Each chapter has its own hook, and the final action sequences are spectacular. To make a comparison to another medium, S.D. Smith reminds me of how the strongest artists in Western comics and manga use dynamic visuals to communicate a cool fight scene to the reader. The best fight scenes aren't just over-the-top special effects displays. Rather, they can be visually cool, but they're also understandable. When Fleck Blackstar dramatically leaps into thin air to attack an opponent, it makes sense why that's actually a good strategy in a desperate situation. Not just in this book, but also in The Green Ember, Smith has a good habit of communicating what the characters are thinking in desperate situations and how they're using strategy to stay alive. The reason I was so emotionally affected by the later chapters is, after such a great build-up establishing the dangers of the world and making it clear that this is a world where the characters can die and where death is permanent, the hero's courage in a dangerous situation seems all the more poignant because I'd spent the early chapters feeling this terrible sense of dread that the rabbits must experience in the context of their world. I may return to the later chapters in future to talk about these themes more and why I think they're so well paced and delivered in this story, but for now I'll close by reiterating what I hope is my takeaway. Get this book yesterday. Again, get the Green Ember if you'd like to start with the first book the author wrote. If you're particularly sensitive about spoilers, you might prefer to start with the Green Ember and then move on to the Blackstar of Kingston, but they were both written to be effective standalone stories, and I have nothing bad to say about my personal reading order, which began with the Blackstar of Kingston and then moved on to the Green Ember. After I finish rereading The Green Ember, I plan to do a video discussing why I love that book as well. And if you do get this book on my recommendation, feel free to let me know on Twitter at @NO1MarmadukeFan or by email at no1marmadukefan@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. I love you guys, and I'll catch you later.